Okay, tell me what happened.
She cut me.
Who cut you?
Downstairs. I don't know.
Okay, hold on.
Wanted to.
Hang on. Hold on.
Please. I'm downstairs.
Okay, who cut you?
This girl I wanted to return to work at.
What did she cut you with?
And I'm pregnant. She got me on my stomach.
Okay.
I'm afraid.
She cut you in your stomach?
I'm pregnant.
On the afternoon of March 18th, 2015, a frantic 911 call was placed from the basement of a house in Longmont, Colorado. The caller, a 26-year-old woman named Michelle Wilkins, was barely able to speak. Her voice was weak, strained, and filled with agony, the result of a horrific attack she had just endured. Michelle had been assaulted by a woman she barely knew, and in a shocking act of violence, her unborn baby was forcibly removed from her womb. Michelle had gone to the house of Dinah Lane, a woman she had met through a Craigslist ad offering free maternity clothes. What was supposed to be a simple transaction turned into a nightmare. Lane had lured Michelle to her home with the intention of stealing her baby. When the attack occurred, Michelle was 7 months pregnant with a baby girl she had already named Aurora. Lane, driven by a desperate and twisted desire to claim a child as her own, had no qualms about the violence she would inflict to achieve her goal. As Michelle lay on the cold basement floor, bleeding profusely from the severe wounds inflicted by Lane, she somehow found the strength to call for help. The 911 dispatcher who answered the call immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Michelle's voice, though faltering, conveyed the terror and urgency of her plight. She managed to tell the dispatcher that she had been attacked, that her baby had been cut out of her, and that she was at 1620 Green Place in Longmont. The dispatcher, sensing the life or death nature of the situation, kept Michelle on the line, providing reassurance and urging her to stay conscious. Despite the immense pain and shock, Michelle remained coherent enough to describe her attacker, Dinah Lane, and recount the events that had led to the attack. The call lasted just a few minutes, but it was enough time for emergency responders to be dispatched to the scene. When emergency responders arrived at the house on Green Place, they were met with a grisly scene. Inside the basement, they found Michelle lying in a pool of her own blood. Her clothes were soaked through from the deep abdominal wounds she had suffered. The extent of her injuries was horrifying. Her abdomen had been cut open, and her unborn child was gone. The responders worked quickly to stabilize Michelle, knowing that time was of the essence. She was rushed to Longmont United Hospital, where a team of surgeons was already preparing for emergency surgery. Michelle's condition was critical, and the medical team knew that saving her life would be a race against the clock. At the hospital, doctors and nurses fought to stop the bleeding and repair the damage done to Michelle's body. They were able to close the wounds and stabilize her, but the emotional and psychological scars from the attack would take much longer to heal. As Michelle lay in recovery, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. She had survived a brutal assault, but her baby, Aurora, had been stolen from her in the most violent way imaginable. As Michelle underwent life-saving surgery, the Longmont Police Department launched an investigation to track down her attacker. It didn't take long for them to identify Dinah Lane as the prime suspect. Lane had a history of telling friends and family that she was pregnant, despite the fact that she wasn't. On the day of the attack, neighbors had seen Lane leaving her house in a hurry, and surveillance footage later showed her driving away from the scene. Lane had driven directly to Longmont United Hospital, the same hospital where Michelle was being treated. She arrived carrying the lifeless body of Michelle's baby and claimed that she had given birth at home, but the baby had been stillborn. The medical staff, however, quickly realized that something was amiss. Lane showed no signs of having recently given birth, and the baby's condition did not match her story. Suspicious of Lane's account, the hospital staff alerted the police. When officers arrived, they confronted Lane, who continued to insist that the baby was hers. However, the inconsistencies in her story, combined with the evidence found at her home, quickly unraveled her lies. Lane was arrested and taken into custody, where she was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. As the investigation into the attack unfolded, the full extent of Lane's deception and premeditation became clear. Lane had spent months constructing an elaborate lie, telling her boyfriend, family, and friends that she was pregnant. She had even gone so far as to fake a pregnancy belly and tell people that she was due to give birth in the coming weeks. To lure Michelle to her home, Lane had posted an ad on Craigslist offering free maternity clothes. When Michelle responded to the ad, Lane saw her opportunity. She invited Michelle to her house under the guise of giving her the clothes, but in reality, she had a far more sinister plan in mind. The evidence collected by the police painted a chilling picture of Lane's actions. They found the knives used in the attack, bloodstains in the basement, and digital evidence that showed Lane had researched how to perform a cesarean section. She had even looked up information on how to care for a newborn, indicating that she had fully intended to keep the baby as her own. The investigators also discovered that Lane had meticulously planned the attack, right down to the moment she would lure Michelle into the basement and strike. The sheer brutality and premeditation of the crime shocked even seasoned detectives, who described it as one of the most heinous acts they had ever encountered. Despite the life-threatening injuries she sustained, Michelle Wilkins survived the attack. Her recovery was a testament to her incredible willpower and the skill of the medical team at Longmont United Hospital. The surgeons who operated on her were able to stop the bleeding, close the wounds, and save her life, but the emotional toll of the attack was profound. In the days and weeks following the attack, Michelle faced a long and painful recovery process. Physically, she had to heal from the severe injuries inflicted on her body, but the emotional scars were even deeper. The loss of her unborn daughter, Aurora, was devastating, and the trauma of the attack left her struggling with anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Despite the immense challenges, Michelle displayed remarkable resilience. She was surrounded by a supportive community, including her family, friends, and even strangers who were moved by her story. The people of Longmont rallied around her, offering everything from financial assistance to emotional support. Michelle's strength in the face of such overwhelming adversity became an inspiration to many. Over time, Michelle began to rebuild her life. She sought therapy to help her cope with the trauma and leaned on her loved ones for support. While the scars of the attack would never fully heal, Michelle refused to let the tragedy define her. Instead, she chose to focus on her recovery and finding a sense of peace after such a horrific ordeal. In February 2016, nearly a year after the attack, Dynelle Lane went on trial for her crimes. The courtroom was packed with people eager to see justice served for the brutal attack on Michelle Wilkins. The prosecution laid out a detailed and damning case against Lane, presenting evidence that showed the extent of her planning and the brutality of the attack. The prosecution's case was built on the overwhelming evidence collected from the crime scene, as well as the digital evidence that showed Lane's meticulous planning. They also had the powerful testimony of Michelle Wilkins, who took the stand to recount the events of that fateful day.
When did you first realize that you were no longer pregnant with the boy?
It was not until the next day in the hospital when I woke up.
And someone told you what had happened to her? Do you remember?
I think I realized. But I still asked Dan when we were in the hospital, when they pulled all the tubes out.
And what did Dan tell you?
That she didn't hear say.
Yes.
He said that she didn't make it.
Can I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Thank you.
Ms. Wilkins, I'm going to show you a plastic bag that has something in it. It's marked for the record as Exhibit B. Do you recognize what's in that bag?
I do.
Can you tell the jury what it is?
It's my sweater.
And is it the sweater you were wearing that day?
It was.
Okay, Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 80.
No objection, Your Honor.
Court will admit Exhibit 80.
Michelle's testimony was emotional and gut-wrenching as she described how she had been lured to Lane's home, attacked, and left for dead. The defense attempted to argue that Lane had acted in a moment of mental instability, driven by a desperate desire for a child. They claimed that she had not intended to kill Michelle, but rather had been overwhelmed by her emotions. However, the prosecution effectively countered this argument by highlighting the extensive planning and premeditation that had gone into the attack. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Dynell Catrice Lane, guilty of attempt to commit murder in the first degree.
On April 29, 2016, Dynell Lane was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the severity of the crime and the profound impact it had on Michelle Wilkins and her family. The case of Michelle Wilkins had far-reaching consequences, not only for those directly involved, but also for the broader community and the state of Colorado. The attack sparked a national conversation about the rights of unborn children and the legal protections available to expectant mothers. At the time of the attack, Colorado law did not recognize unborn children as separate victims under the state's homicide laws. This meant that Dynell Lane could not be charged with the murder of Michelle's baby, Aurora, even though she had caused the baby's death. The case highlighted a significant gap in the legal system, prompting calls for legislative changes to better protect unborn children in cases of violent crime. In the wake of the attack, there were efforts to pass legislation that would recognize unborn children as victims in cases of homicide and other violent crimes. However, these efforts faced opposition from those concerned about the potential implications for abortion rights. The debate over fetal homicide laws remains a contentious issue, with strong arguments on both sides. For Michelle Wilkins, the aftermath of the attack has been a journey of healing and advocacy. She has become a vocal advocate for victims' rights, using her platform to raise awareness about the dangers of meeting strangers online and the importance of following one's instincts. Her story has resonated with many, offering hope and inspiration to others who have faced trauma and adversity. Michelle's willingness to share her experience has helped foster a sense of solidarity among survivors of violent crime. She has connected with other survivors, offering support and encouragement as they navigate their own journeys of healing. Her resilience and determination to move forward, despite the unimaginable loss she endured, serve as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit.
I choose to use my time to address you directly, Dynell, because up to this very moment you have refused to acknowledge us, the victims of your violent actions. I am a compassionate person. This is the foundation of the beliefs from which all others grow. It is clear that you need healing, and it is my sincere belief that you get it. However, there were atrocities committed against me and my daughter that sent a ripple of pain out to so many others, and they must be addressed. Those committed against Aurora's father and all of her grandparents, against law enforcement and first responders who cannot unsee the trauma that you created, and against your partner and daughters who surely have guilt, shame, and trauma of their own to wrestle with for the rest of their lives because of you. I did not learn until the trial just how many opportunities you had to do the right thing and then chose not to. You knowingly left me to die multiple times. The only tears that you shed during the trial were those of self-pity to the sound of your own voice as your lies were slowly revealed. And yet, even now, you cannot come clean about what actually occurred. You embrace your narcissistic fantasy to fulfill the lie you created, and it was more important than my right to live and Aurora's right to live. This is a picture of her.
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point.
Thank you. Ms. Lane, please direct your comments to me.
I trust the judge to make a wise decision on what you believe to be fair, but I believe that you should receive the maximum penalty because I believe you've lost your privilege to live in our society, not only because of your actions during the attack, but also your actions since the attack. Your inability to acknowledge the immense cruelty and evil you committed only proves you are not fit to walk free amongst us ever again. I hope the counsel you receive reflects that acknowledging the obvious, the proven that you've committed these horrific acts, the least you can do is to begin atoning for what you did. What is done cannot be undone, but I fervently hope that you use the rest of your time on this earth with meditation and prayer to help you come to terms with what you have done. It is your only chance for healing the hurt that you have caused.
Your Honor, objection at this point. This is inappropriate. May we approach, Your Honor?
Everybody sit down. Ms. Wilkins, is there anything else you want me to know?
That is all.
Thank you. The point is moot. Thank you. Mr. Garnett?
Sheriff's Office.
Hi, ma'am. This is Scott Sunford. Today at 3:24, 3:27, and 3:28, I had 3 census trips, and I've been out of town with family for a funeral. My wife was home.
Okay.
I just got home, and the board that I have over my back door has been broken. So somebody has forced their way in, and I haven't heard back from my wife. I need an officer here now.
Okay. And what's your wife's name?
Desiree Sunford.
On the morning of April 7th, 2013, at around 3:30 a.m., Scott Sunford made a frantic 911 call to report that his home alarm system had been triggered and he was unable to reach his wife, Desiree Sunford. Scott, who was attending a funeral out of town, grew increasingly concerned when repeated attempts to contact Desiree went unanswered. In the call, Scott's voice was filled with worry as he explained to the dispatcher that he feared something might be terribly wrong. He told the dispatcher that he had received an alert from their home security system, but initially dismissed it as a possible false alarm. However, as the minutes ticked by with no response from Desiree, his concern turned into dread. Scott provided the dispatcher with the address of their home in Yakima, Washington, and urged the police to check on his wife immediately. He explained that he was on his way back but was still a considerable distance away. The dispatcher assured Scott that officers would be dispatched to the residence immediately to investigate the situation. When law enforcement officers arrived at the Sunford residence, they found Scott already at the scene. He had driven back as quickly as possible and was standing outside the house, visibly shaken and holding a flashlight in one hand and a gun in the other. The officers instructed Scott to stay outside while they entered the home to assess the situation.
When I rolled up to the residence, I saw somebody had their spotlight on the house, and he had a pistol drawn. That person was later identified as Scott Sunford. And I asked him what was going on. Why didn't you go in? He said, I don't know what's in there. Which is a very odd answer to give.
Inside, the officers were met with a chilling sight. Desiree Sunford's body lay on the floor in the living room, surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been shot multiple times with a 9mm handgun, with the number of shots suggesting a deliberate and violent attack. The sheer brutality of the crime was evident. Desiree had been shot at close range, and the pattern of bloodstains indicated that she had attempted to crawl away from her attacker, desperately trying to escape. The officers carefully examined the scene, noting the disarray in the room. Furniture had been overturned, and several items were scattered across the floor, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place before Desiree was ultimately killed. The shell casings from the gun were found near her body, and a bloody boot print was left behind by the killer, providing crucial forensic evidence. The discovery of Desiree's body was a devastating blow to her family, friends, and the Yakima community. She was well known and loved by many, and the news of her murder spread quickly, leaving those who knew her in shock and disbelief. The initial focus of the investigation naturally fell on Scott Sunford. As Desiree's husband, he was the closest person to her and had a potential motive, especially after it was revealed that he had been having an affair with Paige Blades, a former Army colleague. The revelation of Scott's infidelity cast a shadow over him, and the police had to consider the possibility that the affair could have played a role in Desiree's death.
At that point, when I had exited the house and walked over to Mr. Sunford and told him that there was a deceased woman in the house. We believe it's your wife. I remember telling him, I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. He had a stone cold look on his face. It seemed like it meant nothing to him. And I told the detectives when they arrived on scene, I think this guy knows something about this. Either he did it, or he knew who did.
Scott initially claimed that his relationship with Paige was strictly platonic, but during the course of the investigation, it was discovered that they had been involved romantically for some time. Scott eventually admitted to the affair, but insisted that it had nothing to do with Desiree's murder. He also stated that Desiree was aware of the affair and that their marriage was in an open relationship, though there were conflicting reports about the true nature of their arrangement. Paige Blades was also questioned extensively by the police. She confirmed the affair and provided an alibi for Scott, stating that he had been with her at the time of the murder. However, the police were not satisfied with this information alone and continued to probe deeper, looking for any inconsistencies or additional details that might point to a conspiracy between Scott and Paige. During the investigation, it was revealed that the Sunford residence had been burglarized just days before the murder. This raised the possibility that the two incidents were connected, especially since the burglars had stolen valuable items, prompting Scott and Desiree to install a new security system. The police considered the possibility that the burglary might have been a precursor to the murder, or that the same individuals were involved in both crimes. Despite the suspicions surrounding Scott and Paige, the police were unable to find any direct evidence linking them to the murder. Both Scott's alibi and Paige's statements held up under scrutiny, and there were no indications that either of them had been present at the scene of the crime when Desiree was killed. For more than a year, the investigation into Desiree Sunford's murder stalled. The police had few leads to follow, and despite their best efforts, they were unable to identify a suspect. The case grew colder with each passing month, leaving Desiree's family and friends in a state of deep anguish. The lack of progress was frustrating not only for the family, but also for the detectives who were committed to finding justice for Desiree. During this time, Scott Sunford continued to live under a cloud of suspicion. Although he had been cleared as a direct suspect, the affair with Paige and the peculiar circumstances of Desiree's death kept him in the public eye. Many in the community speculated that there was more to the story than what was publicly known, and whispers of a possible cover-up or involvement by others persisted. Meanwhile, Paige Blades also tried to move on with her life, though the shadow of the investigation followed her as well. The revelation of the affair had damaged her reputation, and she faced scrutiny from both the authorities and the public. Despite this, she maintained her innocence and insisted that she had no knowledge or involvement in the murder. In July 2014, the case took a significant turn when the police received an anonymous tip pointing to a man named Marty Grismer. Grismer was a co-worker and friend of Paige Blades, and the tip indicated that he had confessed to the murder of Desiree Sunford. The tipster, who was later revealed to be Paige herself, claimed that Grismer had admitted to killing Desiree in a twisted attempt to help Paige and Scott be together. According to Paige, Grismer had developed an obsession with her and believed that eliminating Desiree would allow her and Scott to have a fresh start. Paige had mentioned to Grismer that she was pregnant with Scott's child, though this later turned out to be false. The father was another ex-boyfriend of Paige's.
Marty was my best friend for a long time.
Believing that he was acting out of loyalty to Paige, Grismer allegedly decided to take matters into his own hands. With this new lead, the police quickly focused their investigation on Grismer. They conducted searches of his home and workplace, where they discovered critical evidence linking him to the crime. Gun parts found at Grismer's workplace matched the 9mm handgun used in the murder, and the bloody boot print found at the scene was consistent with a pair of boots owned by Grismer. Additionally, items stolen during the earlier burglary at the Sunford residence were found in Grismer's possession, further implicating him in both the burglary and the murder. Faced with this mounting evidence, Grismer was arrested and charged with second-degree murder.
Where it gets even worse for you is this gun barrel that we've been talking about. That's the gun barrel that was in the gun that killed Desiree Sunford. I've already retrieved that gun barrel from Basic American Foods, and I've already had the ballistic analysis done on it. And the slugs that were pulled from Desiree's body came from that gun.
Marty Grismer's trial began in early 2015, drawing widespread attention from the media and the public. The prosecution presented a strong case, supported by forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and Grismer's own confession. The evidence painted a clear picture of Grismer as the sole perpetrator of the crime, driven by his misguided loyalty to Paige Blades. During the trial, Grismer chose to enter an Alford plea, a type of guilty plea in which the defendant does not admit to the crime, but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to secure a conviction. By doing so, Grismer was able to avoid a first-degree murder charge, which could have resulted in a much harsher sentence. As a result of the plea, Grismer was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. While this provided some measure of justice for Desiree's family, many questions remained unanswered. The possibility that others may have been involved in the planning or execution of the crime continued to linger, leaving a sense of unfinished business for those who were close to Desiree. Even with Grismer's conviction, Desiree's mother, Connie, and others close to her continued to harbor doubts about the full story behind the murder. Connie, in particular, has voiced her belief that Scott and Paige may have had some involvement, or at least prior knowledge of the crime. She questioned how Grismer could have known that Desiree would be alone that night, and speculated that someone must have provided him with that information. Despite these lingering doubts, no further charges have been brought against Scott Sunford or Paige Blades. Both have since withdrawn from the public eye, with Scott reportedly living a quiet life in Washington, and Paige also keeping a low profile. The case remains a tragic and haunting chapter in the lives of those who knew and loved Desiree Sunford.
My heart will never be whole again. The only thing I can do for her now is to make sure that everyone hears her story.
New developments 11 years after the disappearance and death of a Mid-South mother of 4. Her former husband is now facing a murder charge. The death of Karen Swift rocked the Dyer County community when it happened, and it left questions for years.
Karen Johnson Swift was born on January 25, 1967, in Dyersburg, Tennessee. Known as a caring, loving, and dedicated mother, Karen was a staple of her small community. Dyersburg is a small town in northwest Tennessee, a place where everyone knows each other, and life typically follows a quiet, slow pace. Karen's presence in the town was well known. She was often seen at community events, school functions, and local church services. She was regarded as a kind and compassionate individual who had a deep love for her 4 children. Karen married David Swift, and together they had 4 children, all of whom were central to Karen's life. As a mother, she was described as being highly involved in her children's activities, always ensuring they had the best opportunities and experiences possible. From school events to sports practices, Karen was there, supporting her kids with enthusiasm and love. David Swift worked as a manager in a local plant, and while the family appeared to be stable from the outside, cracks had begun to form in their marriage. After years of marriage, Karen and David's relationship had grown increasingly strained. The reasons behind this tension were multifaceted, involving financial stress, disagreements over parenting, and likely emotional distance that had developed over the years. By 2011, the situation had deteriorated to the point where Karen felt that divorce was the only viable solution. On October 10, 2011, Karen filed for divorce from David, citing irreconcilable differences. This was a significant step for her, reflecting her desire to start a new chapter in her life, one where she could find peace and happiness away from the marital discord. Despite the divorce proceedings, Karen and David continued to live together in their home on Willie Johnson Road in Dyersburg, likely for the sake of their children. This arrangement, however, only added to the tension in the household. The night of October 29, 2011, was like any other for many residents of Dyersburg. That evening, Karen attended a Halloween party at the Farms Golf Club, a popular local venue. Karen was seen at the party, socializing with friends and acquaintances, dressed in a costume that reflected her fun and outgoing personality. Those who saw Karen that night reported that she seemed to be in good spirits, enjoying the festivities and the company of friends. However, there were also some who noticed that Karen appeared somewhat distracted, possibly due to the ongoing stress of her pending divorce. Despite this, she interacted warmly with others, and nothing seemed particularly amiss. Karen left the party around midnight. Her departure was noted by a few people, though nothing about it seemed unusual at the time. She drove to pick up one of her children who had been at a sleepover. This was the last known activity Karen undertook that night. The following morning, October 30th, 2011, Karen's white 2004 Nissan Murano was discovered abandoned on Millsfield Highway near the intersection of Harness Road, only a few miles from her home. The car was parked on the side of the road with a flat tire on the front passenger side. Inside the vehicle, Karen's personal belongings were left behind, including her purse, cell phone, and the Halloween costume she had worn the previous night. The car was found in a location that Karen would have likely been familiar with, as it was on a route she might take when traveling between home and other common destinations. The discovery of the car set off alarm bells among those who knew Karen. It was completely out of character for her to leave her car in such a manner, especially with her personal items inside. Moreover, Karen's family and friends were unable to reach her, heightening their concerns. Her children, who expected to see her the following morning, were confused and worried. David Swift, Karen's estranged husband, was also contacted, but claimed he had no idea where she was. As hours turned into days, a massive search effort was launched to find Karen. The local police, joined by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, coordinated a search that involved hundreds of volunteers, law enforcement officers, and specialized search teams. The search spanned miles of rural land, including fields, woods, and the banks of the nearby Mississippi River. Helicopters, search dogs, and ATVs were deployed, but despite the extensive effort, there was no trace of Karen. Local media outlets picked up the story, and soon it was being reported statewide. The community of Dyersburg was gripped by fear and uncertainty. Candlelight vigils were held, and prayer groups gathered, hoping for Karen's safe return. However, as days turned into weeks, hope began to wane, and the grim reality that something terrible had likely happened to Karen set in. Throughout this period, law enforcement officials were tight-lipped about the details of the investigation. This led to widespread speculation and rumors within the community. Some believed that Karen had simply run away, overwhelmed by the stress of her divorce. Others feared she had been abducted or met with foul play. The uncertainty and lack of information only deepened the community's anxiety. On December 10th, 2011, nearly 6 weeks after Karen's disappearance, a discovery was made that would confirm the community's worst fears. Karen Swift's body was found in a remote area near Bledsoe Cemetery, located just off Highway 78, less than 3 miles from where her car had been found. The body was discovered by a passerby who noticed something unusual in the overgrown area near the cemetery and decided to investigate. Karen's body was found partially covered with brush and debris, suggesting that whoever had left her there had attempted to conceal her remains. Due to the length of time her body had been exposed to the elements, it was in an advanced state of decomposition. This made it difficult for investigators to immediately determine the cause of death or gather forensic evidence. The discovery of her body sent shockwaves through Dyersburg. The realization that a murder had occurred in their tight-knit community was deeply unsettling. An autopsy was conducted by the Shelby County Medical Examiner's Office in Memphis, Tennessee. The autopsy revealed that Karen Swift had died from blunt force trauma to the head, confirming that she had been murdered. The medical examiner's report also indicated that Karen had suffered multiple injuries before her death, which pointed to a violent struggle. However, due to the state of decomposition, the exact details of her injuries and the possible weapon used were difficult to determine with precision. The autopsy report also noted that Karen's body had been exposed to the elements for an extended period, which had likely compromised some of the forensic evidence. Despite this, investigators were able to gather some clues that could potentially point to the identity of her killer. From the outset, David Swift, Karen's estranged husband, was a person of interest. Their troubled marriage, the recent filing for divorce, and the fact that they were still living together made David a prime suspect. During the investigation, David provided statements to law enforcement, but inconsistencies in his accounts, coupled with the strained relationship, heightened suspicions. The investigation into Karen's murder was complex and prolonged. For several years, the case appeared to be growing cold, with no significant leads or arrests. However, behind the scenes, law enforcement continued to work on the case, gathering evidence and building a case. In January 2018, more than 6 years after Karen's death, David Swift was arrested in Alabama and charged with first-degree murder. The arrest marked a significant development in the case, although the exact nature of the evidence leading to the arrest was not fully disclosed. It is believed that the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including the inconsistencies in David's statements and the dynamics of their relationship. After his arrest, David Swift was extradited to Tennessee to face charges. His legal team quickly moved to challenge the evidence and sought to have the charges dismissed, arguing that the case against him was built on circumstantial evidence and speculation. Despite these efforts, the charges remained in place. In November 2018, David Swift was released on bond, awaiting trial. The case has faced numerous delays, with legal motions and the complexities of the evidence contributing to the slow progress. As of now, the case is still ongoing, and a trial date has yet to be set. Dana Michelle Laskowski, born in 1965, was a 36-year-old mother living in Puyallup, Washington, with her 3 young children. Known for her dedication as a mother, Dana was working hard to rebuild her life after a recent divorce. Her priority was always her children, ensuring that they were well cared for and provided with a stable home environment. Dana's niece, Amanda Pretty, was a 17-year-old high school student. Amanda had a difficult relationship with her mother, Deborah, who was Dana's sister. This strained relationship led Amanda to seek refuge and support from Dana, who had become a mother figure to her over the years. Dana's home was often a place of comfort for Amanda, a stark contrast to her troubled home life. However, as Amanda entered her teenage years, her behavior became increasingly rebellious. She began to associate with an older group of friends, many of whom were involved in illegal activities, including drug use. Amanda's actions began to worry Dana, who saw her niece making dangerous choices that could have long-term consequences. In the months leading up to Dana's death, the relationship between Dana and Amanda became increasingly tense. Dana, concerned about Amanda's safety and well-being, often confronted her about her behavior. These confrontations, however, were not well received by Amanda. Instead of seeing Dana's concerns as an expression of care, Amanda began to view them as criticisms and attempts to control her life. By late August 2001, the tension between them had reached a breaking point. On August 31st, 2001, Amanda reached out to Dana and asked if she could come over to talk. Despite the recent strain in their relationship, Dana agreed to meet with Amanda, likely hoping to have a constructive conversation that could help resolve some of the issues between them. Amanda arrived at Dana's home that evening, and it is believed that the two engaged in a conversation that quickly escalated into an argument. Dana, as she had done before, likely expressed her concerns about Amanda's lifestyle, including her associations with individuals involved in criminal activities. This confrontation, however, did not have the calming effect Dana may have hoped for. Instead, Amanda became increasingly agitated. As the argument intensified, Amanda's emotions spiraled out of control. In a sudden and violent outburst, Amanda physically attacked Dana. She lunged at her aunt, using her hands to strangle her. Manual strangulation is a method of killing that requires considerable force and sustained pressure, typically lasting several minutes. During this time, Dana would have struggled desperately to breathe, but Amanda, driven by rage, continued to apply pressure to her neck until Dana lost consciousness and died. The attack was brutal and methodical, indicating that Amanda's rage had overwhelmed her to the point where she was unable to stop. The nature of the attack suggested a deep-seated anger that had been building up over time, exacerbated by the ongoing tensions between the two. The forensic evidence later revealed that Dana had several defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought back against her attacker, but Amanda's determination to kill was stronger. Covering up the crime. After Dana was dead, Amanda was immediately confronted with the reality of what she had done. Panic set in as she realized the severity of her actions. In a desperate attempt to cover up the crime, Amanda began to stage the scene. She knew that if the murder was traced back to her, she would face significant legal consequences. Amanda tried to make the scene appear as though someone else had broken into the house and attacked Dana. She manipulated the surroundings in an attempt to confuse the investigators and deflect suspicion away from herself. However, her efforts were ultimately futile, as the forensic evidence would later reveal inconsistencies in the staged scene. After staging the crime scene, Amanda left the house and attempted to carry on as if nothing had happened. She returned to her daily routine, hoping that her actions would go unnoticed and that the crime would be attributed to an unknown intruder. The following day, September 1st, 2001, Dana's mother, Peggy Laskowski, became concerned when she was unable to reach her daughter. Peggy knew that Dana was always in close contact with her, especially given the responsibilities she had as a single mother. When several phone calls went unanswered, Peggy decided to visit Dana's home to check on her. Upon arriving at Dana's house, Peggy immediately sensed that something was wrong. The front door was unlocked, which was highly unusual for Dana, who was typically cautious about home security. Peggy entered the home and began calling out for her daughter, but there was no response. As Peggy made her way through the house, she discovered Dana's lifeless body. The sight was horrifying. Peggy immediately called 911 to report the discovery. The Pierce County Sheriff's Department quickly responded, securing the crime scene and beginning a thorough investigation. The crime scene was meticulously documented by forensic specialists who collected all potential evidence. They noted the signs of a struggle, including overturned furniture and defensive wounds on Dana's body. The marks on Dana's neck clearly indicated that she had been manually strangled, and the position of her body suggested that the attack had been sudden and unexpected. As the investigation unfolded, detectives began to focus on Amanda Pretty as a person of interest. Given her close relationship with Dana and the recent tensions between them, Amanda was one of the last people to have seen Dana alive. Investigators began by reconstructing Amanda's movements on the night of the murder, interviewing friends, family members, and anyone who had interacted with her around that time. Amanda was brought in for questioning, and her initial statements were vague and inconsistent. She claimed to have visited Dana that evening, but denied any involvement in the murder. However, as the questioning continued, Amanda's story began to unravel. Investigators noted several inconsistencies in her account of events, and her demeanor suggested that she was hiding something. The forensic evidence collected from the crime scene began to point directly to Amanda. DNA analysis revealed traces of Amanda's skin cells under Dana's fingernails, indicating that Dana had fought back during the attack. Additionally, Amanda's fingerprints were found on various items around the house, further placing her at the scene. As the evidence against her mounted, Amanda eventually confessed to the murder. She admitted that she had gone to Dana's house that night with the intention of confronting her about their ongoing issues. However, the argument had escalated beyond her control, and in a moment of uncontrollable rage, she had killed her aunt. Amanda's confession provided investigators with a clear understanding of the events that had transpired that night. Following her confession, Amanda Pretty was arrested and charged with the murder of Dana Laskowski. The case proceeded to trial, where the prosecution presented a detailed and compelling case against Amanda. The evidence included Amanda's confession, the forensic evidence from the crime scene, and the testimony of witnesses who had observed the strained relationship between Dana and Amanda in the weeks leading up to the murder. The prosecution argued that Amanda's actions were not only deliberate, but also premeditated. They suggested that Amanda had gone to Dana's house that night with the intention of confronting her, fully aware that the situation could turn violent. The forensic evidence was used to demonstrate the brutality of the attack and to establish that Dana had fought desperately for her life before succumbing to her injuries. The defense attempted to argue that Amanda's actions were the result of a momentary lapse in judgment, brought on by intense emotional distress. They highlighted Amanda's troubled upbringing and the psychological pressure she was under at the time of the murder. However, the jury was unconvinced by this argument, given the overwhelming evidence of Amanda's intent and the calculated nature of the crime. Amanda was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The judge, in delivering the sentence, emphasized the brutality of the crime and the devastating impact it had on Dana's family. Amanda's sentence reflected the severity of her actions and the need for justice to be served. Welcome to Dark Side, your go-to channel for in-depth explanations of intriguing cases. Don't forget to subscribe for more.